here I am at St. James United Methodist Church, and I never thought, friends, that I would experience a day in my life where I'd come to the doors of a church and the church would be locked. Because at that point in 2020, I had been in ministry for about 24 years, and nothing like this had ever happened before.
Initially, we thought the pandemic was something we were just going to get through, and it was going to be quick, and it would be something like a natural disaster where you have a shock and then you have a recovery. And then it wasn't that.
I was pastor of the Palisades Community Church in Washington, D.C., and that's where I was when the pandemic started. We were canceling services and pivoting maybe a week before everybody else did.
I would gather my family together, and we would watch YouTube, and we would watch a sermon that I preached 3 days before. Good morning, everybody. Hey, I'm Bill Currington. I'm the pastor here at St. James. So glad you could join us for worship this morning or whenever you're watching this worship service.
We all became televangelists overnight.
Welcome to worship at the Palisades Community Church here in our sanctuary alone in Washington, D.C.
None of us knew about YouTube in terms of having our own channel. We didn't know about Facebook Live. I remember I had to order a tripod and didn't really know how to use it. My husband became, because of sort of the quarantine family situation, he became my videographer and video editor overnight. He had to teach himself on a Mac, being as emotive and connected to a camera as I possibly could be. And that's something I still think about now, since we live stream every Sunday.
Still have this opportunity to worship together.
Contending, I would say, both with people's isolation and figure out how to stay connected, and then also the increase of people's interaction on social media.
Where all of a sudden, everybody became experts on the virus. That they knew that, okay, the masks are bad, or no, the masks are good. And so all of a sudden, you had, in a country of 330 million people, you had 330 million people who'd been to medical school. When did we reopen? Well, that's a question that I'm still asking Jesus. But here's which source to trust. We kind of just fell on the side of paying attention to what the CDC was saying.
Where more progressive and liberal Christians continue to emphasize the protection of the vulnerable. The more conservative Christians began to emphasize, well, we're supposed to be people of faith and not people who are just afraid.
I was in a context that was not particularly interested in spiritual things. I know that sounds completely strange because I was a pastor of a church, but it was more of a social justice, do good things in the world kind of church. And I found that the pandemic in that context opened them up to greater spiritual questions, that people were seeking meaning, purpose, questions as everything was being taken from them.
And it was very painful because we had actually somebody in our congregation, somebody who was a nurse who died from the pandemic, from getting COVID.
Would you stand as we join our voices in singing hymn 425, How Firm a Foundation? The Christian tradition believes not that we won't die, but that death is not ultimate. We face death as a community, and we couldn't do that in COVID. What do you do when you're dying and you don't see a human face? That is an excruciating question to me. Did we make keeping case numbers low the main priority? Should we have been willing to take other kinds of risks to help people die well?
We're much more, as a society, aware that something really terrible could happen again. I think, and we're also aware of our own resilience in that we all did something really hard that we thought we couldn't do.
Everybody faces questions about their own mortality at some point in their lives. We face them, the whole world faced them seemingly all at once.
There was not a COVID bounce back like we expected. We thought that once we opened the doors, people would start flooding back in, but there was still such fear. We never did recapture 100% of the people that we had. There's been a lot of dislocation that's occurred because of the pandemic.
It was getting kind of harder to live where we lived. That particular small town was less tolerant of variety of views on things. We'd also been isolated from our community for a matter of months, so it was probably easier to imagine. Interview process was unusual because it was mostly over Zoom.
I got the invitation to come to Athens. Coming here has been a very life-transforming experience for me. I really love Athens, and I hope I stay here a very long time, and I think that's something I wouldn't have taken the leap to do if it weren't for the pandemic.
Ministry is based on relationships, and so relationships thrive when you are in close proximity to people. I can get a connection to God just through watching it on YouTube or just watching live stream now. And while that is true to a degree, nothing substitutes the face-to-face interaction and the gathering of people together, because even going back to the first days of Christianity, the Greek word is ekklesia, and that means the gathering of people together, the gathering of Christians in a family of God to worship God together, not isolated.
Probably the most important part of being a pastor is interacting with people, and so trying to find, especially like scared people, how to interact with people who are isolated. That was probably one of the things I realized the most, is how important those casual interactions are to keeping social bonds across ideological differences. How's your family? How's your sore knee? Who's having a joint replaced this week?
We just did a church scrapbook for last year, 2022. And it was very interesting. That was the beginning of 2022 is when we started having in-person meals for the first time in 2 years. And so, but we had masks on, like we would wear masks until we sat down to eat, and then we would spread out. And to see those pictures now a year later, and to see how far we've come. But I would say almost completely back to normal, other than we've been changed by the pandemic, that there's some things that have shifted, that it's not like we just flipped a switch and we went back to February 2020. We're different because of it.
We didn't know it, but we're being taken into a new normal.
It's a phrase I hope to never hear again. We don't use that phrase, the new normal, because we are kind of back to a lot of the same things, but I think the question is, what are our assumptions? There's a pre-COVID world and a post-COVID world, and that's certainly true for churches.